An armed uprising in Russia has ended after the head of the Wagner mercenary group ordered his troops to stand down. Yevgeny Prigozhin abandoned his attempts to overthrow Russia's military commanders after striking a deal with the Kremlin. Wagner forces have now withdrawn from the southern city of Rostov-on-Don, where they earlier occupied the district military headquarters. Prigozhin says Wagner is pulling its troops back to avoid spilling Russian blood. The Kremlin says he will move to Belarus and all criminal charges against him and his soldiers will be withdrawn. For more on this, let's talk to Stefan Meister. He's head of the Center for Order and Governance in Eastern Europe, Russia and Central Asia at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Hello, sir. Can I first get your reaction to events in Russia this weekend?
Yeah, I think we were all surprised what is possible in Putin's Russia. For me, Prigozhin is like a black swan. It's something neither we expected nor the Putin system expected, and it was not prepared for such a kind of coup from inside, you could say. And I think it showed the weaknesses of the Putin system. It showed that this system is so personalized that when Putin not reacts immediately, the system does not know what to do. And in the end, Prigozhin got what he wanted. He's a free man, at least for some time being. So I think it's a very bizarre coup and very bizarre result of this coup.
Bizarre, as you say. I mean, Ukraine is describing this as a public humiliation for President Putin and that he is weakened. You sort of seem to suggest that earlier. But the case is Putin is still in power and so are his military chiefs. So isn't this proof of Putin's resilience?
No, I think it showed for me really the weakness of Putin and the Putin system. I think his speech was for me represented for me a kind of loss of reality. He did not understand that he seemed not to understand that he is really challenged in this moment. Sure, I think everybody supported in the end Putin from the top of the military and also in the system. But for a short period of time, the state lost the power of force in Russia. And I think that's the worst thing which can happen in an authoritarian state and in a so personalized state. So for me, it shows really the weaknesses of the Putin system. And I think it undermines really Putin's legitimacy in a way.
Okay, does the end of the rebellion mean this is the end of the threat to Putin's power, or do you think this is only the beginning?
I don't think that he's really threatened or that he will soon lose power, but we see that he's less strong than we expected, and that there can be events today, tomorrow, in 1 week or in 1 month, which suddenly change the whole situation in Russia. So it's more fragile than we think, but it can also survive much longer than we hoped for.
I guess only time will tell. Yevgeny Prigozhin and Vladimir Putin, they go way back. One could argue that Putin helped him rise from former convict, which he was, to millionaire. So is this a crisis of Putin's own making, you think?
I think he underestimated Prigozhin in a way. And I think what we also see is that there was no contact between both anymore. So Prigozhin needed this to create a situation to get the attention of Putin and get the confirmation that he will be alive. Yeah, because I think Putin didn't support him anymore. When we saw this already since a couple of weeks, that he lost the support of Putin. So he needed a personal guarantee of Putin, and he got it in the end. But I think Putin really didn't realize that he lost the control over Prigozhin. And again, I think that's for me a sign of a personalized system which does not realize anymore what's going on and which has only limited information about the military offensive, about the war, and about what is going on with figures like Prigozhin.
What do you think Putin's next steps will be?
I think for the time being, he confirmed that Prigozhin is the free man. But I think that will not last long. He needs to show that if you do these kind of things, you will not survive. So I don't think that Prigozhin is really safe, at least not in middle and long term. But I think he might also change the laws, to make even more stricter laws inside of the country. And then I think we will have a kind of propaganda which will maybe really let the people forget what happened. So I think he needs to show strength, Putin, at this point. But difficult to say how he will show this strength.
He needs to show some strength, you say. Is Putin more or less dangerous today than he was yesterday after all that's happened?
No, I think he was already dangerous. I think he has no limits anymore. So I think it's not that he's more dangerous. Yes, sure, he's maybe more weakened, and that makes him even more dangerous. But I don't see. So I think it's not for Ukraine or for the West. It's maybe for Russia and people inside of Russia. So maybe people are less safe now, even more less safe than before inside of Russia. That's maybe the case. So he might be even more paranoid also about coups. And that means even more repressive. So I think it's more about domestic Russia and safety of people in the system than about Ukraine or the West.
Stefan Meister with the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
I spoke earlier to DW's former Moscow bureau chief, Yuri Resheto, who's now based in Riga. That's because DW is banned from Russia. I asked him what's happening in Moscow and the Russian cities Wagner briefly controlled.
Well, Russia is obviously trying to get back to normality as quickly as possible, Eddie. As if nothing had happened, things are being downplayed that seemed so big and so important yesterday. The highways to Moscow, which were blocked, will be reopened. It's said damaged streets are supposed to be renovated within 2 days. Buses are running between the Russian capital and the cities in the south. At the same time, the so-called counter-terrorist operation regime introduced in Moscow and the Moscow region continues to operate. Kremlin spokesman Peskov said that it would be cancelled in the very near future, though also the Moscow authorities decided not to cancel the day off that was scheduled yesterday for tomorrow, Monday. So many Moscovites joke and thank Prigozhin for an extra day off.
That's interesting, but we've seen a lot of pictures across social media. What do you make of the images of people celebrating Wagner forces as they left Rostov?
Well, it was a very bizarre day for many people in Russia, of course, and yes, especially for the Russians in Rostov. When tanks came to the city, into the city, people gathered in the center. Some of them posed in front of the tanks and took pictures. Some talked to the soldiers. It seemed that the armed men were for many in Rostov a kind of attraction rather than the real threat. But everyone was at the same time, of course, worried because no one knew how this will end. So when finally the troops withdrew, of course, there was relief. And of course, maybe one of the other was happy that Prigozhin had publicly humiliated the Kremlin and the Russian president. But we shouldn't be naive and think that Russians now are suddenly rising up against Putin and demonstrating against the war. I definitely don't think that will be happening soon.
And now, as part of the deal with the Kremlin, Prigozhin was to relocate to Belarus. Do we know his whereabouts?
No, we don't hear anything about where Prigozhin is at the moment. We just know that the Kremlin spokesman Peskov said yesterday that he should go to Belarus and be freed from any persecution, which sounds weird given that just yesterday morning Prigozhin faced up to 20 years in prison.
So, with all that's been happening, what impact could this have on Vladimir Putin's grip on power?
I think, Eddie, that Putin's power has definitely been weakened since yesterday. I don't know if that was Prigozhin's goal, but Prigozhin showed that something is pretty wrong in the Russian state, in a country where people could be put behind bars for years if they protest against the power of the state. In this country, one man takes up arms in hand and makes demands. And that's why the Kremlin will now do everything possible, I think, to make yesterday's mutiny forgotten as quickly as possible. But one shouldn't think that Putin's power is crumbling. We saw yesterday that everyone from the Federation Council and the Duma to Chechen leader Kadyrov really all backed Putin, at least publicly. And now, after this failed coup, it will be interesting to see whether the laws in Russia will be even tightened.
Quick one on this before you go. How is all this being reported on in Russia?
Well, look, many people in Russia remembered yesterday the 1990s when the then Soviet President Gorbachev was being held in Crimea and there was an attempt coup. At that time, Soviet television continuously aired Tchaikovsky's ballet Swan Lake. Since then, it's a kind of symbol for political uprising in Russia. This time, the news anchor of the Russian state television appeared in the night and interrupted the current program to report on Prigozhin. And you could see that the state propaganda didn't really know how to deal with someone who just the day before yesterday was being celebrated as a hero in Russia.
DW's Yuri Resheto, thank you.